Hello and welcome to another episode of the Frontend Coffee Break, a podcast where we just take a moment to enjoy a nice break with our favorite cup of joe, coffee, or whatever beverage you prefer, and we talk about different front-end topics. Hello, my name is Chucho. I am a front-end developer at Cognizant NetCentric, and with me, as always, we have Don Ricard. Hello.
Hello, guys.
And hello, Ricardo, and welcome. And today's topic, it's an interesting topic. But before we go with that, are you enjoying some coffee or something? Or
I am dry at the moment.
Oh, my goodness.
Like a desert.
Yeah. Like a desert. I made the mistake of when I was preparing the coffee, I just grabbed, I have two bottles and I grabbed the wrong one. And now I have caffeine coffee, which, well, that means that I might have maybe it'll take a little bit of time to go to sleep today, but well, it's fine. Anyhow, today's topic is the topic of accessibility. The Accessibility Awareness Month happens on every Wednesday. Oh my goodness, every May. And specifically the Accessibility Awareness Day, GAAD, happens the third Thursday of May. And today we're celebrating a little bit accessibility in our own way. We know that this podcast is not going to air on that date, but still we wanted to make our homage. So today we're going to be talking about accessibility. So, Ricard.
Yeah. The first question, do not dare ask me what is accessibility. It's a tough word.
It is a tough word.
Let me bump it around and Chucho, you talk a lot, but what is accessibility?
Well, first of all, the funny thing is that the answer to that is very, at least I find it a little bit counterintuitive, because when you say accessibility, for me, it sounds like a science, like a field of knowledge or something like that. But when you're talking about accessibility, and I'm going to read directly from the Wikipedia and other pages that you can find the definition from, is the design of products, devices, services, vehicles, or environments so as to be usable by people with disabilities. So it's when they say, what is accessibility? Is the way you design things so that people with disabilities can use it. I was surprised to look at the amount of people that have a disability in the world. It's 1 billion people that have some sort of disability in one way or another. And it's quite surprising. I mean, I myself could technically suffer a slight disability, which would be my eyesight is not really good when I'm reading close by. So that counts, I think, if I'm not mistaken, as a little bit of a disability.
Totally. I mean, it could be anything. It could be people that cannot use keyboard or mouse and to do it via voice, or the other way around. People who have like eyesight problems and need to use a keyboard. And yeah, definitely. I think maybe junior developers or people that are starting on development might not realize how important this is, especially for maybe big websites or government websites. You know, banks, airlines, things that have to be used for people to live, right? So
yeah, well, usually when we're creating websites, at least at the beginning, and we don't care about we treat the end user as ourselves. You know, we think that everybody is, in Spanish we have a saying, el león piensa que todos son de su condición, which is translated as the lion thinks that everyone's has their same condition or something like this, which basically thinks that we tend to think that other people or the users of the websites that we create are going to be like ourselves. That means that if we don't have any disabilities or we don't suffer or have any specific whatever situation, we tend to think that others are going to be the same, and we tend to design for ourselves and not to be inclusive and worry about other people.
Yeah, and the same happens with performance, no? I think we talked in the past how if you try with your test with your latest MacBook, latest iPhone in your fiber connection, it has one experience, but think about or put yourself in the shoes and people using a slow end device and a slower connection, maybe Subway, maybe in another country. So yeah, it's part of it.
And although accessibility is as this design of devices, services, vehicles, and everything, for example, when you're in the bus, you make a bus accessible by adding ramps that, for example, people with wheelchairs can can get into. We're going to center ourselves a little bit on web accessibility, which is what we are currently, or this is the one the accessibility that we can do something about in our line of work. And well, how would you define web accessibility?
Again, it's very broad. I mean, for me, when I think about accessibility, I don't know why, but the first thing that comes to mind is keyboard navigation. I don't know why. I mean, maybe it's because the thing I most implemented, but again, we go back to what we said a minute ago, that there's a wide range of disabilities or types of ways of using one website. So maybe keyboard is not what you need to be fixing based on your user base or whatever it is, right? So it's very broad. So yeah, I think mostly about keyboard. What do you think about when you think web accessibility?
Well, web accessibility in the end, as I said, it's the making sure that the website that you're working with or the website that you have, it allows as many people, as a broad amount type of people to access and use it in a not a correct manner, but that are actually effectively able to use it. Reading a little bit about the terms, it's like accessibility is not just about physical access; it also encompasses digital access. Websites, software, digital content are usable by everyone, including those with disabilities. And the end goal, that's the end goal. The end goal is to create an inclusive experience where everyone, regardless of their ability, can equally, and this is the important thing, that can equally access and participates in all aspects of life, and in this case, that are equally able to engage with a website. So that would be the web accessibility, or what web accessibility is, and in a way, a little bit why it is important. Now, yes, please.
I was going to say that now we are talking to front-end engineers, and I think it's important to also say that it's a multi-dimension sort of. I mean, you said design, which is the perfect keyword for saying first, the websites need to be designed in a way that are accessible as well. Right? It's not just about how you code your HTML and your JavaScript, but also I think designers, product owners, whatever, they need to be aware, hey, we need to be accessible. It means that maybe I have to give some features for others, or I need to, okay, maybe I cannot do this because this is not accessible, or, things like, I don't know, if you add a bunch of videos, you gotta know, you gotta do the captions. If you add images, you gotta do the alt text. So it's not just about coding.
And now that you mentioned for example, the design, the color, I was taking a look at the accessibility.day website, which is basically the Global Accessibility Awareness Day website. It's the foundation's website. And I was looking at some data that they had, like the costs of most common accessibility failures in homepage in percentage. What the leading cause is low contrast text. Up to 86.3% of the pages fail to have a good enough contrast
But that's not coding. That's not coding.
That is not coding.
Design. That is design. Right?
That's
so
right.
They send you the PDF or the PSD, the Figma file, whatever it is, and if the designer created the palette in a way that is not accessible, that's their fault. Yeah.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that nowadays we have, first of all, once again, and this usually happens because the designers or the coders themselves, when they look at the text, for them, they have enough contrast because they don't have any disability, they don't have any issues, any visible issues. And they design for themselves. And there are fortunately a lot of tools that you can use to actually check this kind of things. I don't know if you've used do you have any tools that you've used in the past?
The DevTools works fine for me. I mean, when you pick a color or do color, whatever in the DevTools, it would tell you if it's AA, AAA compliant. I think you can even click on that and it will give you actually not the whole spectrum, but colors that you can actually pick, but not like a service. Do you use a service or a bookmark to do that?
Well, I remember that one of the biggest accessibility projects that I worked in the past, they did hire a service, and what they did is a complete audit of all the pages, and then they just created a list of all the issues. I don't know exactly what tools they were using specifically, but what you did get is a report of all the potential issues. And there are, of course, a lot of very nice tools that you can find for accessibility. It's not just this one Swiss knife, but you have to use several tools. One of them specifically talks about contrast. Now, you mentioned this, the A, double A, triple A. What is that?
Those are specifications, so are standards that define, how do you say this? I mean, I don't know the definition exactly.
Compliance.
The
level of compliance.
The compliance and the level of how strict you gotta be, or what things you gotta check when you're in your implementation to say, yes, I am complying with AA, AAA. And depending on the business you are, depending on the industry, you might be required to do doubles, triple, or whatever, right? So
yeah. For those who are not familiar with this, there's actually an association, an initiative, which is called the Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI, that is, I don't know, I wouldn't say controlled, but it's part of the W3C consortium. Is it WC3 consortium? How do you mention that when I never know how to. I
always say WCA. I don't know, WCA.
Well, anyhow, it's part of this thing, let's call it, and they are the ones that are in charge of creating the documentation to determine what is accessible and what is not accessible, which is the WCAG document. I think we are in 2.1. It's a very, 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 very big documentation, but you don't need to read everything. I mean, the nice thing about accessibility is you can start slowly in the most common, most important, most simple things, and they just keep on learning more and growing from there. And precisely the AAA, AAA is the compliance level in this documentation. And of course, everyone should at least try to achieve A compliance, which is fairly simple. And I would say that it is the type of compliance that usually, if you follow best practices, you most likely are almost reaching completely. But as you said, many organizations like banks, for example, they're forced to use a AA compliant level, which can be a little bit harder to achieve.
Yeah, but when we go back to the accessibility.day website that you mentioned before, I'm now there, and it's so interesting that like they say here, cause of the most accessible failures on homepages. They're all content, but the first one we said it's design, low contrast, but all the rest are content, missing alt text, empty links, missing input labels, missing empty buttons, and missing document language. Okay, that is us. That is us. Frontends on the HTML tag, but like 4 out of 6 is content editors. Interesting.
Yes, and sometimes, for example, the way that we work and the projects that we do in Cognizant and Netcentric, that is a content management system, a CMS, a powerful CMS, is sometimes if you're creating a content component that has an image and you don't add the possibility of adding the alt text, that would be sort of like our problem. But then again, we do usually, all the components that we do create, they do have that. So usually if they don't have it, as you say, it is a content issue. Let's talk about, if you like, a little bit about our own experience working in projects and accessibility. When were you aware of accessibility, or when did you start to being aware, or in hindsight, when did you start doing accessible things, even if you didn't know that you were doing accessibility?
Wow, complicated one. I think I'm ashamed to say that I actively thought about it very late in my career. It was many years that I had no knowledge about this. Nobody taught me about this. The companies I worked for, nobody really mentioned this anywhere because they were very small clients, right? So really, like when you do a website for the local barbershop or the local fruit store, really, they don't know anything, right? It's when you go enterprise, when you go to banks, airlines, or multinational companies that they say, hey, we have this requirement because otherwise we get maybe fines or we get some sort of issues with the government. So I guess very late, but I want to believe that before knowing what accessibility was, I was trying already to work with like HTML compliant, like validating my HTML, which already gives you a lot of accessibility, right? Using not images for things rather than coding with CSS. And so in a way, I was already working with somewhat accessible tips and tricks, but not actively thinking. What about you?
Well, web-wise, I think when I started doing web development back in 2006, I had a friend that was very much into looking at the latest trends and all these kind of things. And he was the one that taught me, like, hey, if we're using an image, we should be using an alt. Why? Well, because maybe the image won't be able to load correctly, and that's important. We should use titles. We should use this or that. And as just things that you mentioned, simple things that are sort of like best practices, that just by doing these best practices, you get to do, you get to be, or to help to create accessible websites. Now, looking, for example, at the top 6 causes, where we're talking about missing images in alt text, this is like a super simple basic thing. And I cannot believe that it's a 66% of the websites miss this. Empty links as well. Why would you put an empty link? Or missing form input labels. It's like, come on, if you're creating a form, there's certain ways to a best practice is the way to do it. And the same thing like empty buttons. Once again, all of these kind of things, I think that they would naturally fall into the best practices, or if just you're doing it right, you don't have to worry.
I mean, these are the easiest things. I mean, when we get started with, again, keyboard navigation and focus on the elements, and allowing you to, like, if you have a carousel component, being able with the arrows and space and whatever, being able to move across different carousel items and read the content out loud. I mean, that's super hard. Also, like when you have a message that comes up dynamically on the page, you gotta announce that to the user, right? I mean, this is not trivial things, and from this website it looks like everything is trivial. So please let's fix that. So next year maybe the list is going to be a complicated one, which is going to be like a step forward.
And but that was when I worked about it in accessibility with a website, web accessibility. But I didn't know, but I have been working with accessibility way a couple of years before that. And one of my first jobs was in a center, rehabilitation center in Mexico, the CRE, Centro de Rehabilitación y Educación Especial, Special Education Rehabilitation Center, where they help, well, just as it named implies, they'll help rehabilitate, people that had an injury or that have some sort of disability. I actually went there when I was a teenager because I injured my back. And I had to go here to help myself get better. But I got a job there in the IT department, and basically, among other things, I helped just maintain the computers and such. But one of the most satisfying things I did back then, and was the center had a program where they helped people with disabilities to find a job. Because it's not as simple for some of them, depending on the type of disability that they had. And there was this one guy, and of course, that's the trigger of the thing that I did, but there were many others that had mobility disabilities. Well, in their arms, they couldn't move their arms correctly. They were like, I don't know how to describe it in English, but like they have very limited mobility, and they could not handle a mouse, or they could not handle a keyboard for sure. So we had people with these disabilities that came to the center and would have to fill a survey. And it's like, okay, what do we do to help them out? Because one way would be to have someone sitting, asking the questions and such. But the other way, and what we wanted, is for them to be able to fill the survey themselves. So they had a lot of types of accessories, and I found that they had this board. It was like a tactile board. Bigger than a tablet. It was quite large. And the nice thing about this board was a programmable board where it had the dots, so it was divided like in a grid. And you can actually, there was software that you can create areas in that board and then add macros to those areas. So what I did is that I printed this imaginary board with huge buttons. And these buttons, I mapped them to an Excel. Back then, they were using Excel. I mapped them to macros in Excel. So the survey was done in Excel, and they could actually just move forward, backward, choose different options, and they didn't need a precision in order to do this. So they could actually do that on their own and fill out the form. And it was very nice. I was very satisfied with that work, and it's something that they have whenever someone wanted to do a survey. So
that's amazing. That's very it's brilliant, actually. No, I mean, creating yourself like a bigger keyboard. a more easy keyword for not having to be, as you said, more precise. I mean, well done, Chucho.
Thank you. No, but
Really.
And right nowadays, there's a lot of companies that work with creating accessible devices or accessible peripherals, like even gaming controllers and a lot of the other things. That's super nice. But back then, well, it was nice to be able to work with that. But that was back then. Nowadays, what is your experience with accessibility in your current projects?
Oh, it's a sign. I mean, I understand how important it is. We've been talking for 20 minutes, but whenever I get the accessibility requirement, it's like, oh man, this is gonna be a pain. It's hard. It's not easy. I mean, okay, I'm not an expert either, but usually it's not easy. Usually, again, it's not about adding a label. It's usually not about colors. It's about more complicated things like, yeah, again, you click this link and you gotta go skip there, or you have this error message not being announced, and then these things work in this device, not in that device. So really, on our current project, we already like fine-tuning, fine-raining. That there's now all these major issues, of course, and they're already way gone. So we're now fine-tuning and the experts, the audits that I just said at the beginning, we do run them maybe once in a year or something, and the experts, they I don't know what they use. They use MBDA, these special tools to create the reports, and some are very easy to fix, right? But others are like, oh, this is going to be a complete refactor of the component because we didn't think about, or maybe like the requirement itself is not accessible, right? Okay. I mean, again, if you need to the user, I don't know, to input data, don't put that inside the carousel or tab navigation. Is hard to move around and back and forth. So sometimes really requirement engineering or business analyst plus client plus designs, they need to think about before it gets to development, because then it's like, oh, this is very hard to do. It's going to cost you triple the money. Can we do it easier? So yeah, that's where we are right now.
Well, you said it. It's harder to add accessibility to an unaccessible site than to build a site from the very beginning with accessibility in mind. And it's very important that if you have, for example, requirement engineers, that they know about accessibility. And when you're implementing everything, you should be thinking about accessibility, because it is really not that much more cost to make something accessible. It usually follows best practices, so it helps some SEO and other stuff. So it's really only benefits. There's no downside on it. And then depending on the legislation, some things like this, eventually it might be required for you to, hey, should make this accessible. It's like, oh, darn.
Yeah, I would challenge a little bit the cost. I think it does have a cost. Not the most basic things. We're talking about ALS or labels.
Yeah.
It's given. But again, when we're talking about complex stuff, like navigating with the keyboard and jumping around and announcing things, first, you need the talent. I mean, you need the front-end developers, you need the business consultants and whomever is in the team to know about these things, to know how to identify them and then implement them. Because maybe you know that, of course, if you have an error message on the screen, you got to announce it. How do you do that? You got to learn about ARIA roles and how to do this sort of attributes in your HTML elements. So yeah, it's not easy, and of course it takes you away from doing other stuff, so it costs you money.
I've learned, for example, that it is more costly if you're constantly doing the accessibility testing all the time, every sprint. For example, if you're developing thinking accessibility in mind, it's fine. But then if you as a developer have to test, because usually when we test, we have to use screen readers, we have to use phones and the text-to-speech and all these kind of things. And usually not only for Android, but also Android and iPhone, which work a little bit different, and that can be costly. And then you have to do it as a developer to make sure you did it well. And the quality, the QAs have to do it as well, the quality assurance people. So it does take time. In my experience, one of the best ways to approach this is what you said and what you guys are doing, which is you develop with accessibility in mind. You just make sure that you're putting your ARIA labels where they should be. Just take into account the basic things which are quite easy to follow. You don't have to do an accessibility testing immediately, but you have to do accessibility audit from time to time, every 6 months, every a certain amount of time. And that's when you find the issues, and that's when you fix them. Now take into account that and trying to fix it. Because otherwise, as you said, it would be costly time-wise, but just follow best practices and eventually do from time to time audits. the first time that you do the project, you have to do one before doing the delivery to production, and then eventually just maintaining. And that would be the approach that I would follow.
Yeah. Have you found like usually the most accessible websites are the most ugly? I think it's a correlation, right? I don't know why, but when I think about very accessible websites like the tax thing we do in Spain, right? This is a very accessible website. Everybody can use it. It's super ugly because, of course, the drop downs need to be native and the inputs need to be all native. And nowadays, of course, we don't want the old classic drop down. We want a fancy drop down with type aheads, autocompletes, and these things are not very accessible unless you make the effort, right? So
maybe we could do something like the dark mode, accessible mode, which there are. There's a contrast mode in some websites, but maybe you could have this as well. This could become a common practice, a checkbox in the browser that says, I want this level of accessibility, and maybe but it is, of course, try to make something
code it twice. I don't know. I think we gotta get rid of all the CSS and everything. It's just do HTML pages, plain HTML pages.
No JavaScript, no CSS, just text, right?
Yeah, accessible 100%.
Now, before we close, because we're close to finishing the time that we have, I would like to take a little bit of time to talk about the Global Accessibility Awareness Day once again. And as I was saying, the GAAD Foundation was launched in 2021 to mark the 10th anniversary of the Global Accessibility Awareness Day. You can go to the website, accessibility.day. And although most likely when you hear this podcast, the latest, the Global Accessibility Awareness Day will have gone by, it's still, I invite every listener to go there and take a look, because they have, for example, a lot of events that can be online where different companies and people are talking about accessibility, making you aware. There are different. I was participate. Well, you can participate directly. I was looking. There's a guide that recommends you. Hey, you have for example, social media. Here are some tips on how you can make your social media more accessible to other people, which is nice. It's just a guide that you can find there. And I love the initiative that they have, and I would invite all our listeners to do the following thing. Usually, it all started by a article by John. I'm sorry that I forgot the last name. A developer in based in Los Angeles, where he invited and said, "Hey, let's choose a day, and why don't we, everyone around the world, in that day, do a small audit in one single page that we worked in, only one, and try to determine which accessibility issues it has, contrast, lack of alts, anything. Just take a look at that, try to fix it, and then help spread the awareness of this by writing about it." And nowadays, I think it's simpler than ever. You have Twitter, formerly X, formerly known as Twitter, and a lot of social media. And I would really encourage people, even if it's not Global Accessibility Day, maybe next year do it, but even if it's not Global Accessibility Day or month, do it now. Go to a website of your own, a webpage, choose it, take a quick accessibility test, and try to fix something, and then post about it. Post about your how complicated it was or not. I mean, let's help spread awareness. What are your thoughts on that, Ricardo?
That's it. I love it. Yes, spread awareness. Thank you, Jojo.
Okay, so I guess that this is it that we have for today's episode. It was quite nice, I must say. This is a very nice topic, and in the end, the idea is that we all form part of the world. Let's not exclude anyone from it. And so, thank you very much. Hope you have a great day and week and month.
Bye-bye.
See you.